afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to this, our fourth webinar on envisioning South Africa's next chapter. Friends, it's been an exciting period, especially last week. And I'm sure we're all looking forward to really giving a reflection on the elections as well as the outcomes and the state of the country now in terms of where we are. My name is Lonwabo Patrick Kulati. I serve as the CEO of Good Governance Africa, which is a think and a do tank organization that works in the Africa continent with offices here in South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, as well as Ethiopia. Our vision is that of an Africa where citizens are empowered, where governments are effective, businesses thrive, and poverty is eradicated. And that is our driving force, and everything that we do as Good Governance Africa derives from that vision. I'd like to appreciate our partner, the Men and Guardian, for partnering with us in delivering these webinars to you at home. And I'd like to welcome all of you, and I encourage you to please make your comments, submit your questions. I've got a great panel here in front of all of us who is ready to engage on this topic that we're going to be talking about today, a critical reflection on the election that we had in South Africa. It indeed has been an exciting period. A lot of developments took place in this election. So it is time that we pause and look into what has happened, see if there are lessons to be learned, and see what the country can do going forward. For this webinar, I've got a panel in front of all of us. On my left is Kio, yes. And she is a philosophy lecturer and a law PhD scholar at University of Pretoria. She's a founder of the Azanian Philosophical Society and the Black Women's PhD Candidate Collective. That's very interesting. Maybe we should talk about that one of these days. The main themes of her research include justice, race, emotions, moral philosophy, philosophy of law, and history. We've got a lot to learn today, at least from here. So the next person next to her, I think he needs no introduction. His name is Mondli Makanya, a veteran journalist, a man who's a great writer, and he's the editor-in-chief at City Press. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you with us today. Kaya Koko, who's the investigative editor at Men and Guardian, is still on his way, but we're going to get started with our panelists here. I'm going to start with you, Monty. We've had these elections, as I said. What are your key takeaways? What are from just the way the election went and the results, and what do you think lies behind these results?
Okay, I think to be a bit cliched, I think we can very safely say this was a seismic event. It was really huge. There was a lot of expectation that the governing party, the ANC, could be brought below 50%. And that was the aim of most of the political opposition parties. They wanted to achieve that. But the ANC, even though they were afraid of going below 50%, their trepidations, but they actually still were holding out for the possibility of them coming above 50%. And if you saw in the last few weeks, the late surge of campaigning that the ANC did, bringing out old veteran leaders and so on, former presidents, etc., they really thought that had changed the trajectory. But actually, but at that point, even the most optimistic stroke pessimistic, depending on where you're sitting, and polls were saying that they were moving closer to the 50% mark. They still put them below 50%. But I don't think many people actually thought that a 40% was a realistic thing. So that's huge. And I think it's a major moment in our democracy that you no longer have a dominant party, one dominant party in the country. And I think the other element, I think that's also a takeaway. So on that front, I think it's fantastic for the democracy, not as a mixing of the ANC, but I think now it's good for accountability. The ANC is going to be afraid of losing power. If they get to lead the government again, they'll be more conscious of the fact that people will call them to account. And I think the other element, I think that is the emergence of this this animal that we cannot understand. So we'll get back to that in more detail later on. Yes, whose policies we don't know, which is led by somebody who actually wrecked the country for 9 years and who wrecked the culture, the political culture, and many of the tenets of the foundational elements of this country. But clearly, kind of like more than, I think it's 2.3 million people thought, no, we want that guy. Let's say, with all his warts and everything. So we need to understand what that was about. I think Gwede Mantashe took a very shorthand route to it and said it's just merely kind of like Zulu nationalism. But I think there was more to it about people crying out for something else. I mean, it was, I think it was a black mark against the ANC. Then I think, just thirdly, before I think the other element is the performance of the IEC. The IEC has been almost without blemish for all the elections that we've had, particularly from 1999, which was like the proper, I think let's gauge them from there rather than 1994. They've always run great elections, very few glitches. I mean, any big process like that will have glitches. But the IEC has been excellent at it. It's been unquestionable. This time round, I think they did their best, and they say that they've had budget cuts which impeded their ability to produce an almost 100% product. But there's a lot of the glitches that you saw this time around kind of like were cause for worry. I don't think it was nefarious, but I think it calls to question the smoothness of the machinery. And unfortunately, it played into the hands of people who are questioning the legitimacy of the election. And it's the first time in South Africa that we find ourselves in a situation where people are saying, but there's a possibility that these elections were not free and fair. And I think that's one of the things that we've always prided ourselves on. That on the day after elections, everybody says, we lost, we won. And everybody moves on. But now there's this cloud hanging over it. And I don't think, again, I must repeat, I don't think it's because the IC rigged anything. It's just that there were those glitches which gave way for people to question the outcome.
Wow, thank you so much. You mentioned 3 things there, if I remember well. One, the seismic loss of the ANC, MK, and the issues around the IEC. Anything from your side, any thoughts about what you think are your takeaways from this election?
First of all, I had a very hard time sleeping this. But I think what was interesting to me was the disjuncture between the public imagination as displayed on social media, the message of the mainstream media just about how many people were excited about voting. There was quite a lot of conversation on social media as well. But when it came to voter turnout, that was quite surprising in my view, because of the public conversation that had been going. Also because of how people would report that they waited 5 hours in the line to vote. And I think the last vote was cast at 3 a.m. on the 30th of May, something like that. So that's what stood out to me, but also the way that the MK really just threw a ball at the bowling pins in terms of our expectations. you could see the tension with the established parties. You know, as much as the DA, for instance, likes to say that it grew, it didn't actually grow. It lost a couple of tens of thousands of voters, even though it rose up a percentage point. So the way that the MK came into being and threw a spanner in the works, but also the rise of the PA was very interesting to me. Yeah, it was a very, very exciting time, and it remains to see how it will affect.
Thank you so much for that. Now that we have the elections and the outcomes as we all know, what potential does this outcome have? Because ultimately the election is about the citizens. What do you think this outcome bodes for the people, for the citizens on the ground?
I think it's a very tricky question.
Yeah.
Because we do have to admit that a large percentage of the registered population did not vote. And so much of the time when you talk about the citizens and the people have decided, etc., right now we're talking about 58% voter turnout.
Yeah. The registration was something like was expected to be 67, thereabouts. 56, yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, there were predictions that because of what Kay was saying, the excitement that we thought we were feeling in the air, that it could be as high as 66%.
Right. Okay.
It is very. We must be very careful in terms of how we interpret the people's voice.
Yeah.
Because there is this notion that when people don't vote, they are apathetic. They don't care about their political destiny. And you had all these memes going around that if you don't vote, or a no vote is a vote for the ANC. And as we have seen, that is not the case. So we do have to be careful. How do we interpret what the voice of the citizen is? What does it mean for those 42% that didn't vote? So the question for me then becomes, do they really not have a voice? And obviously they do have a voice. But the problem is that their voice is delegitimized because of this idea that your vote is your voice. South Africa has one of the highest percentages of protests, or the highest rates of protests in the world. People are using their voice. And when many of them, when they abstain from voting, that's them using their voice, expressing their autonomy, expressing their agency, expressing their dissatisfaction, right? So when we look at the elections and the voting process and the voting project itself, the election project, we need to ask ourselves exactly how legitimate is it? Exactly how representative is it? And for a lot of citizens, they believe that being co-opted into the system is not to their advantage.
Okay.
Because the choices are limited. You see, so when we think about what does this mean for citizens going forward, we need to not look just at that 58%.
Okay. Now let me ask this question slightly differently. Just to say that now we have these people, and just the context is that there was a lot of dissatisfaction with government before, a lot of protest, as you were saying. Now that people have voted the way that they have, so I think it's going to be better for citizens now. Are likely going to be better now that we have this combination of political parties, the new entrants, everybody that has been elected. Let's just look, for example, at the top 5 and all those that went to parliament. Part of the question is, are things likely to be better for the citizens of the country? Mont, what do you think?
Okay, before I answer your question directly, I want to half differ with you, maybe 60% differ, 70% differ, whatever it is. Yeah. But I do strongly differ with that view that staying at home is a voice, is a way of expressing your voice.
Yeah.
The fact that you have the protests that we have, and we got lots of protests in this country, and those protests are a lot of the time it's ANC supporters, stroke voters, stroke members, protesting against councils that are run by the ANC and provincial governments that are run by the CP. Those people are essentially protesting against a party that they vote for, that they support, and that they back. And then when nothing happens, then they start to burn tires, and sometimes they even burn public utilities that actually belong to the general public, schools, clinics, and so on. And then when election time comes around, you'll have communities that say, I'm not going to vote because it doesn't mean anything. We are going to be failed anyway. The thing about South Africa is that you actually do have alternatives. And the idea that there are no alternatives is, I think, like, in as much as what has happened is that the dominance of the ANC has delegitimized government and government institutions. And then people, because the ANC tended to associate government with itself. So people see the ANC. There's no, then people see in their heads, people see the ANC as government and government as the ANC. So if I vote, then I'm just giving those people who have messed me up yet another chance. And if I don't vote, it is my vote against that particular party. I think there are alternatives. There are people who offer something different. Unfortunately, they have not been able to weave their ideas and messaging into the general public, into the voting public. And they have failed people as much as the ANC has failed people. And this time around, actually, there were a lot more choices. There are so many alternatives, and some, yes, you don't like them, but like there must be something you like about this party. And a lot of, whether it's Gayton McKenzie and his party saying kind of like, because there's a lot of sentiment around foreigners. Yes, then go and give McKenzie your vote because he doesn't like foreigners. If kind of like, if I as a colored person feel aggrieved in this society, let me do that. And people did do that. And there were parties that were offering good governance. I know we're here, but so strengthen what is there, strengthen the democracy. And I think that it's important that we, as a person, as a citizen, and as a journalist, and as somebody who believes in this country, I am very judgmental of people who actually don't go and vote and use that voice. But then to your question about whether people's lives will be the lives of citizens will be affected. And I think it's not going to be an overnight thing, but I think it's very critical that you have a party that is now a governing party that is going to be forced to be accountable. And I am hopeful that even those who thought it was a fait accompli that one party would always win will now take an interest. We are going to elections in 2026 and the local government elections in 2026. And I think there's a chance there to hold whoever is in power in a particular city or municipality to account. And whether it's the DA in Cape Town, whether it's the ANC or coalition here or IFP in Mutu. But I think there's a chance now to actually, for the citizen to say, my water is not working, my electricity is not working, I am being failed. I think that this election has given more power to the citizen.
To the citizens. Thank you so much. I'll give you a chance now because I want to link, because Theo wants to respond to what you're saying now as Kaya is coming to set up. I just want to look at some of the stuff that is coming through here. And which is in line with the conversation where we are now. The first one from Anonymous says, what has driven the increase in ethnic voting patterns in this election? DA and PA in the Western Cape and Northern Cape, MK, KwaZulu-Natal, and Mpumalanga. This person states it as a fact. I don't know, maybe people might differ around that. But please think about how you're going to respond to that. we also have David Allen, who says, can you discuss voter turnout? Yeah, I think you're talking about this issue. And by age groups and its implication going forward. So I think we'll come back to look into the other questions. But for now, you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah.
Now, and then as soon as you do, and then I'll introduce you, Kaya. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Good to have you. All right.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Um,
And then respond to these as well.
so, first of all, I understand your discontent, Wantley, because I suspect that the investment into this democratic, or your investment into this democratic project is deep, or the system that you currently have. That is not the case for millions of South Africans. They have disinvested from it, and it is not because they have given up. As you say, people do have options, and they're not. But the options that you list are still within the same paradigm, and they're rejecting the paradigm. So, for instance, if you mention that there are other parties and the problem is that they're not doing enough groundwork, that is not necessarily the case everywhere. The PA is doing a lot of groundwork in the Western Cape, and they have managed to sway people from good, perhaps, from the DA. The surprisingly, I don't know if it's surprising, but what stood out for me is how well, or that the Northwest was the province where the EFF did really well. And if you were to actually go through the whole, the Limpopo was 25% the ANC. If you really want to go deep into tribalism, then you have to ask why not EFF, since Malema hails from Limpopo, right? But the point I'm trying to make is that people are not apathetic. They have not given up. The non-voter base is not a monolith. And we need to understand that these are reasoning people. These are people who say there are alternatives. That's why you have movements that deviate from the democratic project, or the project that is South Africa. Okay, so I could give an example like Abahlali Basemjondolo, or even the township where I'm from in Mohwase in the Northwest. People have, there's an organization or movement called the Landless Peoples of Mohwase, right? These are people taking power into their own hands, saying that I myself, perhaps they view themselves as citizens, or they view themselves as resistors of the project itself. I have the agency to decide my own political destiny. And so when we say that people have choices that they're not aware of because of the lackluster efforts of other parties, that's not entirely true, because parties have been going underground and people have been rejecting them, not because of a irrational rejection or loyalty towards the ANC, or disappointment towards the ANC or a dominant party in their area, but because they don't agree with their principles.
Okay.
That's a legitimate reason for why people are not voting for, and one, I'm not voting. Secondly, I'm not voting for their other options, because they see options away from the system, and they see that the system, remember, it's not a monolith of non-voters, so, but we have a percentage that sees the system as not worth investing in and finding alternative methods of deciding their own political destiny.
Okay, clear. I think we're gonna maybe cycle back to this, but I think we've covered it quite enough for now. I just want to bring in Kaya at this point. Welcome, man. Thank you so much for coming, Chonyani. He is the investigative editor at Mail and Guardian, and as I said, he was held up and now he's here. Kaya, we've already covered a bit of ground, but I do want just maybe to hear your thoughts about some of the takeaways from this election. We've spoken about the MK. Key takeaways from this, and what do you think is a driving force behind whatever you're going to tell us?
Well, the biggest takeaway I took was that former President Jacob Zuma was bigger than the ANC and the IFP in KwaZulu-Natal. The numbers bear that out. Going into these elections, I knew that the MK, because of the polling that was coming out, would do well. nationally, but specifically in KwaZulu-Natal.
Mm.
But I thought the IFP would put up a bit more of a fight, seeing as at the last two elections, local government 2021, national and provincial 2019, the IFP sort of benefited from who, after the removal of former President Zuma as country president after he had lost, while his term as ANC president ended in 2017, and then he resigned Feb 2018. The IFP benefited from that in 2019 and 2021, and then MK came in. So I thought, well, the IFP has retained its voters, because remember, the ANC used to poll at around 34%, 30 odd percent before 2004 when they started governing KZN, and then exponentially grew from there. So I thought the IFP had returned, got some of its voters, and it would be hard for the MK, specifically President Zuma, to get back those voters. I was wrong. Many people many people were wrong. And it was very surprising how a person or a personality is bigger than two established organizations in a vast area like KZN. It's the most populous a province in the country, has the most voters as well. Just over 20% of the voting public are from KwaZulu-Natal. It had the highest voter turnout at these past elections. So for people to be more loyal to a person rather than an organization, that was the biggest takeout for me these past elections.
Thank you so much for that. I just want, now we've spoken about the big losers and the big winners, obviously. But I'm interested in the EFF. They've lost five seats in Parliament, if I'm not mistaken. Did you expect that, given the amount of investment they are campaigning? You saw all those stadiums full and all of that. You saw the energy behind their campaigns. What do you think about that?
No, I expected it.
You expected it? Oh,
after the 2021 local government elections, or during there, I actually wrote an article that the EFF has plateaued in terms of voter numbers. I'd seen it from then. I don't think they'll do this badly. I thought maybe they'll go down to just around 10%. They would be lucky if they got what they got the last time. But I could see that their numbers, purely because the EFF is a, and they say it themselves to their detriment, they have a national outlook. So a lot of the things are top down rather than bottom up. It's a personality organization as well. They even spoke about it in their organizational document at their last national conference in 2019. The Secretary General, Godric Gadi, actually said that the EFF needs to be, the then Secretary General said the EFF needs to be careful not to go down the route of parties like the PAC, the IFP, and so on, where it is one person,
one issue, one person,
person dominant. When Sobukwe passes away, it's over. When Mangosuthu does not campaign, the IFP done badly. But even with those warnings, they still did not change, and we found out. The leader, Julius Malema, says that he's going to contest again in December, that he's not going anywhere. So those things are still going to continue. And it'll still be a top-down organization. And that's why I think it won't grow unless it changes its outlook.
Wow, that's an interesting, I never thought of that. Mohontle.
Yeah, no, I think I expected the same. I didn't expect them to go down. I expected them to let that reach the ceiling. And that's where they would stay. But what they did also, I think two things. I think their personality thing is big. Because there is one person, and the organization is an individual, and the thing is that what they do also is that they alienated a lot of South Africans. South African is very middle.
Middle of the ground.
Middle of the ground. And then when you start to raid cliques and do violence, and the continuous disruptions in Parliament, it may have been sexy at the beginning when Zuma was there, but the continuous disruptive behavior of kind of being almost hooliganish behavior on their part.
They'll be unhappy with
South
that.
Africans. And then the other thing that also hit them, that they invested a lot of of resources in growing in KZN. And it actually did pay off in 2019, and it paid off in 2021. Yeah, in terms of like they actually grew their votes and had a footprint. And as a result of that, post that, leading to 2024, they actually thought that was going to be a growth area. And it seemed to be until something happened on December 16 last year. Yeah, and then this phenomenon came along, and because the MK basically just took from everybody
and swept away
everything that the EFF had gained, everything that the ANC, obviously ANC was the hugest loss, and then victim of MK, and then obviously the IFP also lost. But the EFF, all those resources that they plowed into KZN, recognizing that elsewhere they were never again going to be the big party. I'm like they were not going to grow exponentially in Gauteng and elsewhere. Kind of like KZN was going to be a fertile ground for growth, and that got wiped away. And then I think just lastly, I think also the dictatorial tendencies, expelling people just willy-nilly, it hit them, particularly, in Limpopo and elsewhere, where people just got expelled, and
all those people that didn't bring the buses and so on. All right, yes. I've learned to look at you and say you're going to come up with another way of looking at things. Maybe you have a different view. What's your take on this one?
I actually am interested in the issue of plateauing.
Yeah.
My context is the university space.
Yeah.
Right, and the EFF is very active on university campuses.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I just wonder how accurate the prediction of plateauing will be in 5 to 10 years when the population grows older, the supporters of the EFF. I do see how the Monty said hooliganism.
Did he?
I would call it that.
I said they won't be happy with that, but okay, it is.
I think agitation is a good word. I mean, polite society needs to be agitated, because sometimes polite society is apathetic society, not apathetic.
Yeah.
It is an apathetic society. It is a society that's too comfortable in the status quo. So we should appreciate the EFF for the agitations they cause. So I'm just interested to see in 10 years how will the EFF fare given their popularity on university campuses. But also the KZN issue about their investment in KZN, it raises the issue of party funding. Like, what are we saying about how well a party does in a specific region, right? To the point where they would invest in one area more than another. There's obviously an issue of funding there, and just how many resources they have to spread themselves out to the rest of the country. So we need to think about where is the funding actually going, to which parties, and by who's funding the parties that have the resources, and for which reasons, and what does it tell us about the power they have to determine regional politics?
Okay.
That's a question for me.
All right. Quite deep questions. Let me just come back to our viewers. Welcome to those of you who've just joined us. Maybe you are at your office or at home, wherever you are. You're watching this live right here on this platform, between partnership between GGA, Good Governance Africa, and the Mail and Guardian. We're having a great panel discussion here, reviewing and reflecting on the elections that South Africa have just had, right? The last few days. It's really an exciting time. I just want to deal with one last party, which maybe you may have views on, which is the Patriotic Alliance. What do you think about their own performance? given the fact that a lot of people looked at them as a one-issue party, but they seem to have, gotten 9 seats in national parliament,
very significant,
and a few other provincial seats as well. What's your take on that one? Who wants to go first?
It's been 10 years in the making.
Okay.
They contested their first elections in 2014.
Yeah.
But then they were then a single issue
Yeah.
organization in terms of they were saying that they are there for the so-called colored voters who correctly they said that they felt that they were marginalized by all organizations. At the time, though, the colored base was firmly behind the Democratic Alliance.
Yes.
Over time, over the next 10 years, that seemed to have dwindled a bit. The loyalty of so-called colored voters within the Patriotic Alliance, within the Democratic Alliance rather, and they've gravitated towards the Patriotic Alliance because they've had that messaging. They've then included the immigration issue, which was their slogan, Abahambe. So it became a two issue organization overtly. Obviously, their manifesto speaks about bringing God back into schools, the death penalty, beneficiation, all of those things. If you read their manifesto, but out overtly, what they were pushing was colored people, which I think is correct. Colored people have been left behind in certain areas by certain parties, so that they benefited from that. And also what I also believe is probably correct, despite the crude way they went about it, the Abahambe and some of the things that they were saying, there's a big discontent among the working class, especially people who live in the townships, that when so-called illegal immigration happens, illegal immigrants don't move to here in Rosebank or Sandton or wherever. They go where the barriers of entry are low, so that they can contest. Where are the barriers of entry? They are in the township where there's scarce resources already, and so that tension in the rural areas as well. So that those tensions that people seem to rebuff, although they were very crude, very very incendiary in the way they went about it. You take away all of the rudeness and the inciting language they were using. The reasons why people are crying about illegal immigration is true, and they capitalized on that. And I'm not so. I thought they would do better than this.
Okay.
But they still did okay.
I mean, on the first few hours, they were on 4%.
Yeah.
And they started dropping.
Yeah.
All right, Mandla, you want to say something?
No. Just
sorry.
Yeah. So just in addition to that, I think it's not like MK or kind of like all the new parties, the Rises and the Action SAs who have just they've actually been at it, and very cleverly so. They've actually worked the ground. They have done the community work
on that issue.
On issues generally. Okay. They've connected to communities, and they've been very active in contesting at councillor level. So by the time the big election comes along, they actually have a network of councillors and public representatives who actually are working, who have been working the ground. So they were able to turn that into votes. What a remarkable thing. I mean, like 9 seats in parliament is no small feat.
It's credible.
They could be one of the kingmakers, perhaps, in some of the
it's uncomfortable for most of us in the mainstream, kind of like thinking of Gaten and Kenny.
But it's what it is. What it is.
That's democracy. But that's the beauty of it. That democracy is supposed to throw up a whole lot of things that that do make us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Except the part that Gio and I disagree on. But I mean, like,
that's democracy too.
Yeah. But I mean, like, as I said, we will at some point get to MK.
Yeah.
Is that like the most of us? I mean, like, I'm sure sitting in this particular gathering
virtually or physically,
Yeah.
kind of like are discomforted by the idea that a party like MK can enjoy this much support and that it will hold that much sway in the society. But if we believe in this thing called democracy, and then let's accept that that's what democracy threw up. And
let's accept the democratic views of people. Pierre, did you want to make a point on that one? Because after that, I want us to take on the questions that relate particularly to MK. Yeah.
I think the issues that the PA ran with really show that there are discontents that parties that are not the ANC are latching onto. For instance, the issue of immigration, the issue of colored people being left behind, and we need to really interrogate our assumptions about the narratives that we allow to permeate in society. For instance, when you talk about colored people being left behind, it's very easy, to latch on to a discontent because people do feel like the system is working against them or has locked them out. But we also need a critical awareness in South Africa to be able to interrogate the narratives that we believe unquestioningly. Okay, so, for instance, if we look at statistics about wealth according to race in South Africa, we still see white, Indian, colored, black, right? Or African. We still see that. And so when we say that colored people are being left behind, we really need to, why are we latching on to that assumption? Secondly, who is leaving them behind? Because again, it's for me, it just seems a question of misdirected anger or disappointment. It's one thing, for instance, to say that foreigners are taking our jobs and our women. As if it's like a foreigner on this side and a South African side. It really means, towards them. But foreigners have been taking from South Africa. It just depends on who you call a foreigner. There's a strong argument to see South Africa still existing as a settler colony or a neo-colonial state. But there's been such a pervasive permanence to this idea that we are now a democracy. We can now aim towards the aspiration to resemble a Western nation because we are a developing country. Our job is to develop enough to get there. But the resources are still in white hands. When a man from Somalia comes and opens a shop in a township, it's very easy for people to see them as a threat. And as opposed to, for instance, when ShopRite wanted to put Dispaza in townships, right? It was like, wow, what a good idea. This is good business sense. It's taking away from the township economy and it's taking the money straight into Ackerman's pockets. But no one's looking at Ackerman as this person has come to take our livelihood or at least diminish our quality of life. So we need to really interrogate what is it that we take for granted about what the nature of a quality life is and who is in charge of giving us a quality life and who is taking away our quality life. And what do we mean by a quality life? Because if we bring in the issue of agency into a quality life and not just streets without potholes or a job in every home, like Gosa was saying. What is it? Again, I want to go back to these people who did not vote because we always emerge from this idea that the people have spoken. People have been speaking, but there's some rhetoric that is rendered illegitimate. Let me give just an example of how invested we are in the narrative of South Africa as a legitimate state.
Make it snappy.
When you had in the transition, there was a referendum for white people about what they want, the mandate, whether they agree that South Africa should become a democratic state. But there was no referendum for black people that ANC should represent black people at CODESA. You see, but now once the narrative is that the ANC is speaking for the people and they can legitimately negotiate, then they become the black voice. So we really need to interrogate our assumptions about how legitimate the electoral project is. Given our history, we must never dehistoricize the electoral project.
May I just quickly before we go there?
Yeah.
Just
I
to
want us to
elaborate.
move to the question.
Yeah, to the question. Just shortly, just elaborating on why I was saying that I believe that certain areas of colored people were not being satisfied. Is that there was actually a constitutional court judgment, I think in 2016, where Solidarity, the trade union, represented a few correctional service officers down in the Western Cape who were overlooked for promotion within the department in prisons because they were colored in favor of black officials, Africans officials in the Western Cape, and because the department was using the national demographic for employment equity instead of regional. The Concord said no, regional and economic factors within Western Cape should be considered. So because colored people are a majority in the Western Cape, or then were a majority in that specific area, that those factors should have been factored in and the Concord said it was unfair labor practices. And then around the same time, you had Mzwanele Manye saying there's a overpopulation of colored people in the Western Cape that they need to go around. So I'm sure you remember that. So those are the sort of things that I was speaking to, and there are other examples as well. But this week they will take the whole day speaking of them.
I think the elections sometimes are about the issues that people experience at the time, and many people do not do the kind of analysis that he is talking about when they're thinking along the experiences that they're going through at the time. But let me just, I'm told by my team here that we need to have a good amount of time to questions that are coming through. The first one from GGA reporter: what needs to be top of mind in the new coalition government that our previous government overlooked, and how can Parliament work towards deepening accountability mechanisms given the low trust in the democracy institutions? I think the Afrobarometer have come out with a study where they show that people are saying if they could come an autocrat and run the government, as long as they're going to deliver whatever we want, what we need as society, we don't mind about democracy and things like that. So the question is, as these guys are going to go into Parliament now, what is it on top of mind that they should have that the previous government overlooked?
Well, Parliament is it's not going to be a rubber stamp institution anymore. With no party holding a majority, nothing will be rubber stamped. So the Pala issue, for example, to use a popular example, that still could come up, and there won't be to paraphrase Nomvula Mokonyane, Tibakadibonu, defend the president with their buttocks. That those days are over where certain things are going to be rubber stamped. So what is top of mind? I mean, it's different for different people. What the priority should be. But one thing I know for sure, and I think South Africans need to be comfortable with, is that nothing will be no ill like the Gadla report, Pala report, those sort of things, defending the indefensible. I think those days are over now, without where there's no party with an outright majority.
Do you think that those issues might be unburied again?
Well, the
reopened.
The Freedom Front Plus has already said that at the Rock in Midrand, Dr. Kone Mulder was pretty open to us as reporters that they were going to restart the Pala investigation. It was supported by certain sectors of the EFF. Certain leaders of the EFF said, yeah, if that is brought out, I'm sure MK as well, because the current president is not their favorite at the moment. So yeah, the Freedom Front have already said that they're going to bring that up. So that should be interesting.
Okay.
So I would say, like we use this term very so broadly, this term called service delivery, that it has lost meaning. So I think that what should be top of mind in the coalition discussions are issues such as the basic services, water, that's kind of like, electricity you can kind of do without, but like we can't do without electricity, kind of like what we've been going through is not right. So I think that should be very much kind of like how to stabilize. I mean, like I think there's a lot of work has gone into stabilizing the electricity grid already. So I think that is definitely one, and I think water is definitely let us avoid a catastrophe on that front. Then I think the basic living conditions of people in the country, like if you go into informal settlements, I mean, like we saw what's been happening in the Eastern Cape this week. I think that a lot has to be done with flooding, but basically kind of like people live like pigs, in many areas. So I think that kind of like we actually, the first 5, 10, 15 years, particularly the first 10 years of this of the democratic era, actually did amazingly in terms of changing the lives of people. I mean, like, and I think that's one thing that the ANC-led government actually kind of like, but it was their government. I don't like to say the ANC-led government is what they say, something that can actually, that we as Africans be proud of. People's lives did change, but people's lives have now seem to have gone backward in a sense. I mean, like, so I think that without using the term service delivery, but I think like the basic services that people receive, I think actually that needs to change. And I think kind of like, and then very importantly, yes, corruption is huge. And I think we have to see people actually being tried for some of the things that have happened. But I think personal safety in our homes and on the streets, we actually need to feel that things are actually changing to make people feel safer. I do not understand why we have metro police standing on highways, trapping people for going 10 kilometers above or being on their cell phones, when actually they have a policing function, a visible policing function. They should be in the townships, in the suburbs, actually making people feel safer. I mean, like, our whole paradigm around policing and safety actually needs to change, because people feel unsafe. I mean, people in the suburbs cry a lot more about it, but in the township, the lady walking back from work right now, kind of like now that winter's come early, she's the most unsafe person at the moment. So I think we actually, that priority has to move way up, and like we have to get a sense of urgency around it, particularly around, because there is so much unemployment in the country.
Okay, so the question is, what are the accountability mechanisms that the previous government may have overlooked? And my interpretation is that there's a certain understanding of what accountability is and for what government should be accountable for. My interpretation is, let me say, when people think about accountability, they're thinking about how do we stamp out corruption? How do we make that sure that government is delivering on the services that it promises?
Yeah.
But when you have a parliament that is composed of political parties that have international interests, then you have to ask exactly how much accountability can these parties have towards the people, and what kind of reporting would they have to do to their funders, right? Exactly what kind of corruption are we looking at? It's very easy for us to access the idea of the Guptas, for instance, or the scenario, the example of the example of Jacob Zuma, without interrogating what levels of accountability or kinds of accountability does this particular parliament make up, occlude or exclude or make illegitimate. Okay, so that's one thing that I think we need to relook at this word accountability and the concept of it.
Don't you think the bill on being transparent about the source of funding would help there?
I think it does have a level of
It's not a bill, but it's an act.
right. It does give a level of information and perhaps even confidence for voters to know exactly who's, quote unquote, pulling the strings in some level. But at the same time, it doesn't change the circumstances. At what level, with people knowing who's funding a party, at the end of the day, how will it change how the party operates, right? Yes, there can be criticisms that are leveled against the party, but again, we need to ask which funders are considered legitimate and which are not considered legitimate, and according to which paradigm. So if you have like the Frederick, oh no, I forgot the surname, but it's an organization, a German organization, being the main funder for the DA, for instance. What does it say to us that a German institute is the one that's funding a South African party? What is the relationship between that international, what kind of interests does that international entity have in South Africa? But when people look at that, they're more likely to think, well, it's just an institute for liberal democracy. But what is it actually doing at the local level? What kind of decisions is it affecting at local, regional, or national level, and in parliament specifically? What's interesting to me actually would be accountability mechanisms for local politics, because I wonder how the issue of coalitions will affect how people on the ground, or will affect local relationships in terms of the electorate or citizens, not the electorate, of citizens and the expectations of the community leaders, or rather the party leaders, and what they expect from them if coalitions are more the norm than an exception. For me, that's what's interesting, and how people on the ground think of their relationship with the government in that respect, where it's not a majority party that's necessarily leading.
Sure. We are in uncharted area of our democratic life, and indeed, I don't know if the elections have been formally declared yet. I'm not talking about the announcement that was made there, but there is a process legally where they have to be formally declared, and then from there, that's when we start counting for 14 days in terms of the constitution. So I'm not sure where we are now, but whatever the period is between now and the time and the end of that 14 days, there's a lot that is happening. Parties are already discussing and so on. So this coalition is going to give, these coalition conversations are going to impact the country's direction in ways that are very, very interesting. But there's a question from Des Chetty. I think he's got 3 questions, which I'm going to throw. It says, what are your views or thoughts of stability in KZN should MK not form a majority government? Maybe the other parties gang up and they sort of kick the party out. And then what are your thoughts on the SA becoming a radical or separatist state? I'm not sure, but you guys are the ones who have to deal with these questions. And then the last one is, what impact do you think an ANC, EFF, and MK coalition will have geopolitically, economically, in the short term and in the long term? Because even Rekim Konza is also talking about the impact on foreign policy position, but of whatever configuration this is going to be. Mon, what's your take?
Well, I think that the idea of an MK, ANC, EFF coalition is a fantasy. I don't think it's possible that it can happen. I think
why so?
Now, first of all, I'll say that I'll start with the ANC and MK. The animosity is just way too deep. Jacob Zuma, who is MK, he's the sum total of the party. I know that there are other leaders who kind of but he is what the party is about. He will not. His whole mission is to punish Ramaphosa very badly, and so there's no way he's going to want to keep Ramaphosa in power, and the ANC is not going to want to be dictated to by MK. Secondly, MK's demands are going to be, again, they are just kind of like outer worldly, and they basically want to to abolish the constitutional state of South Africa and come with something quite kind of like, I don't know what brand of Mamelodi Nyaope they've been smoking, but it's yeah, but like they actually, so it will be an unworkable relationship from a policy and position point of view, but also from a personality point of view. They will not live together, and the ANC will not live with those dictates. The EFF and the ANC has, that would be maybe workable, but I don't think so, because the ANC has experience of working with the EFF at municipal level, and the EFF has been very transactional and has had very bullying tendencies, wanting to use its power, its kingmaker power, to really dictate to the ANC what to do. They did the same thing to the DA when they were in coalition with the DA. So at national level, the ANC cannot afford to have a partner that lives with that. So that thing that Steenhuisen dreamt up, the Doomsday Coalition, that some people, there are people in the ANC who think that it's who would like that to happen. But it just cannot. It cannot happen, that three-way coalition. And I mean, like, if I had to, put money on it, and I'm not going to do so, I would go with basically kind of like the ANC and the Blue People, and the ANC, the Blue, the DA, and the IFP. I think that's the most realistic, because when you look at many positions policy-wise, there isn't too much of a divergence between those parties. They are pretty much centrist. I mean, look at the ANC, probably center-left of that, and I mean, look, the broad church of the ANC being center-left of that, and the others being more centrist. But they would be able to find each other. There'll obviously be a lot of issues of contestation. I think and one of them will be something that's got nothing to do. It's got a lot to do with us, but it will be foreign policy. I think the Palestine-Israel issue, even though it's not central to the existence of the South African state, that will be a huge issue, because of the DA is a very firm and pro-Israel stance, and the ANC through the South African government has taken the position it has, and it's a position that actually has the broad support of the South African public. The ANC is not going to abandon that.
It's quite interesting. I had a conversation today with an ambassador, I won't mention it, but his view was that given the shift that's taking place in Europe towards Israel, perhaps that could sort of shield the DA here, in the sense that the matter is no longer as, but
Gio has been mentioning the issue of funding.
Yes, that issue is a big determining factor in fact, all over the world, I guess. But I think here in South Africa, it has real impact on the lives of people. Maybe you want to give your own take on this. So the one was on the stability of KZN if
without
MK is not there.
It's going to be unstable. There's no way to sugarcoat it. There will be violence if that doesn't happen. I'm not thinking this. They've said it. They are saying it. If you hark your mind back to July 2021, prior to the riots that claimed over 340 people's lives, who died in that week during the unrest after the former president was arrested. There were voice notes that were circulating, stirring up, saying if the president or their president, if Mr. Zuma gets arrested, then this country will know no peace. And that's what happened. Those voice notes have begun again. You go on social media, so the same patterns that led to the unrest. And you must remember, back then we were locked down. We weren't moving as freely as we are now. So it could even be worse than that. I'm not saying that MK needs to go in by hook or by crook, but there needs to be, and I think there's going to be an agreement between the IFP and MK, or MK and the EFF to govern KwaZulu-Natal. I'm hearing from various credible sources that the IFP is not looking towards the MK, but it wants to form with the DA and the ANC, maybe another smaller party as well. And the
KZN.
in KZN, and the DA leader in KZN, Mr. D. McPherson, actually tweeted a picture of him and a leader of the IFP just today, saying that it's looking good. Now, paraphrasing him there. So he seems to believe that the IFP, because you must remember, before the elections began, the IFP and the DA had an agreement together for KwaZulu-Natal that they'll be working together. They are now hand in glove. But Mr. Hlabisa, the leader of the IFP, said during the elections that look, they will speak to the MK, give them an ear. So what comes out of those negotiations will be critical. But depending on how it's done, my biggest fear is that there will be a lot of violence and unrest in KwaZulu-Natal, and unfortunately, it could happen like it did in 2021 and spill over into other provinces. Just a short one on the radical separatist state. I don't think that will happen in South Africa. I think that was put to bed these elections. Remember, there was a Cape Independence Party that wanted to secede from the Republic. They were totally hollowed out. So that idea of any person wanting to secede from the Republic, that was put to bed. Even the Cape Independence, they're going back to the drawing board. They've accepted that they were crushed. There's no appetite for that. People want to stay in a unitary state. The vast majority of South Africans, let me say, as Mr. Makanya said, we're a moderate, middle of the road country, and the electorate proved that. So there's no seceding that's going to happen. Certainly in my lifetime.
Right. Just to add to that a bit before you come in, just on that last point, there's been some speculation around MK, kind of like, because KZN is a stronghold, kind of like becoming a secessionist movement, like the IFP of the past, there's been that. But I think MK, again, that I don't think it can happen, because MK, in as much as KZN is its stronghold, it actually made quite an impression in Gauteng and Mpumalanga, and it's seeing itself as growing nationally. So
yeah. All right.
Can I actually ask a question about this question?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So why the lumping of the ANC and the MK and the EFF into a possible coalition exactly? For instance, why not bringing in the IFP and the Patriotic Alliance?
Can I overload on that? Yesterday I was in a program with Professor Tulma Donzela, and in her calculations, what she says, the country, the majority of the voters have voted for the left. If you look at the different parties, they voted for the left. I may be putting my own interpretation. So I got a sense that she was saying, if that is what the will of the majority is, in other words, that the country must go left rather than right, who are we, or political parties, for them to take a different stance to that? I don't know if I'm complicating the question, but I thought there were linkages there. You guys can respond in whatever way you feel.
No, you haven't complicated the question. You have half answered the question.
Oh, okay.
No, I think there is that sense that kind of like that those three parties represent the left, and that some people are saying those are freedom charter parties. They all kind of like come from the ANC anyway, so it should be easier for them to work together. So I think that hence the lumping. But I think it's a false lumping, because yes, the ANC and the EFF you can characterize as left. I don't think you can characterize MK as left. It's something else. It's an animal that you don't understand. Anybody who wants to bring back kind of like that we should be run by chiefs, and that kind of like kids must be whipped, kind of like to be brought into line, pregnant girls must go to Robben Island, and and that LGBTQ rights must be scrapped. I mean, like those are not left positions. They may speak about nationalization and kind of like get the land back and kind of like and nationalize the banks and mines and so on. That's left rhetoric. But that basic philosophy of the party is not left progressive.
I think they are fiscally progressive but socially conservative.
Okay.
The MK, that is, which is why I believe a coalition between them and the ANC and even the EFF, for example, will fall by the wayside, because yes, economically they might speak about beneficiation, might speak about land redistribution, and about social policy is where they're going to maybe, and also the ANC, I wouldn't say is a leftist organization, as Mr. Makanya correctly characterized it. It's a center but center left organization, much like the DA is a center. I was raised with respect. And the DA is a center right organization. So that's why the DA is closer probably to the ANC policy wise than it is to any other organization. The EFF is what I would say is a proper progressive organization, in that it is fiscally it is very progressive, socially it is progressive as well. I mean, Julius Malema took a hammering from the African diaspora and certain quarters in South Africa when they came out against the Uganda hate bill, where they marched in favor of LGBTQ rights, and he put himself out there, Julius Malema, knowing full well how homophobic, misogynistic the continent is. But he put himself out there to stamp the authority that yes, the EFF is a progressive organization, whereas the MK is not. And that's when they're not going to find each other. So they might find each other on economic policy, but on socially, the MK is to the right, if I could say, even of the Freedom Front Plus.
Yeah. All right, correct. I'm going to come to you now, Kia. But what we're doing now is really doing the analysis here. I have a graphic in my head of where these parties are located in the political spectrum. You know, I mean, in that graphic, the ANC and the DA are on the center right. You know, the Social Democratic, there's Communist, there's this. So it's quite interesting. But now I guess that as we're now moving towards the coalitions, the whole issues of ideology might maybe take a back seat as political leaders are becoming pragmatic about what needs to happen. So, in your mind, what would pragmatism mean under the circumstances? Look, the voting has given us these parties, so they now can decide. Listen, we're gonna go back to our ideological point of views or policy or manifesto points of view, or we can seek to find a way to meet each other halfway so that we can move the country forward. What's your take there, Kia? What should they do now to take the country forward? Because everybody's looking and waiting to hear from the leaders of political parties about what is going to happen. People may have been interested in the ideology, in the manifesto in the past, but they're now saying we need a government in place. What should they do?
I think a government without a clear ideology is a dangerous government, because it also means that there is a hidden ideology. Even if it's not necessarily hidden, it can masquerade as common sense. So by that I mean that, and not to pick on Mondi here, but to pick on Mondi. This idea that the Constitution is a sacred text that we must protect at all costs. Something that, you know, we're talking about a spectrum, and people tend to think that the EFF is on the far left. The the EFF itself calls itself a charterist party. It says that it wants to protect the Constitution. Right? So it's not a threat to the Constitution. So we need to be clearer about what kind of spectrum we're talking about and what we take for granted about what's on that spectrum. For instance, if we think about the abolishment of the Constitution, right? And I know that in the general imagination it seems entirely radical, but in ordinary conversation in universities about the abolition of the Constitution.
So what do you mean?
They
You mean
are-
it's being taken out and replaced by something else when you say that?
It means that we need to interrogate the core assumptions of that Constitution. Let's start with the Freedom Charter.
Mm.
The Freedom Charter says South Africa belongs to all who live in it.
Mm.
Okay? Live and work, I think, is the 96 Constitution.
Mm.
On what basis
Mm.
is that the case?
Mm.
If you think about the creation of the South African National, the SANNC that was the precursor to the ANC, and how when the Land Act of 1913 came into being, in 1914, the SA Native National Congress
The precursor to the ANC,
right? Sent a delegation to Britain, to King George, to say that we want to be included in South Africa. We want to be have the same rights. We want to have franchise into this new constitution, not the constitution, the document, but the state, because South Africa.
This concept,
right. And there they said our forebears have realized that they should share the land, not only share the land, but that they submit itself to the British government. So when we think about what constitutes an outlandish idea, we need to go back historically. Why would that idea make sense? Right. And so I think those are the kinds of questions we need to ask instead of thinking just about pragmatism. My interlocutors did mention that the MK and the ANC wouldn't work together on the basis of policy, if I'm not misinterpreting.
And personalities.
And personalities, right? And that's a good thing.
That they don't work together.
It's a good thing that they are contestations. Because in a country like South Africa, we don't want to silence the voice of those who say we are not partaking in this project. And that's what happened in 1990, from 1990 to 1994. When we talk about a transition from the old South Africa to the new South Africa, we need to ask who set those terms. And we're not asking those questions because what we are focusing on and what's preoccupying our minds is service delivery. Do we have access to healthcare? Even if you look at the Constitution, it's very, you need to read exactly the wording that's in there because it doesn't say you have a right to healthcare, a right to sanitation. It's a right to access to healthcare, access to sanitation, right? So when people talk about the abolition of the Constitution, they're not saying abolish any kind of or reject any form of constitution. They're saying abolish the idea that history doesn't matter, that the history of conquest and colonization doesn't matter. What specifically in the Constitution would make us think about those elements? The issue of private property. The MK is not thinking about abolishing or the land issue. Actually, earlier on you asked a question where I wanted to say that what's at least salvageable from these elections is that the MK at least gives some semblance of an ongoing conversation about the land. So we need to think beyond pragmatism and also think about pragmatism for who. Even the idea of we're going to open the markets, we want to get as many people into the workplace as much as possible. Who does the workplace benefit? We need to remember Marikana, that people were asking for 12.5, and their bodies are going into the belly of the earth. The people who are not doing any of that are getting billions of rands, right? You have one of them being Cyril Ramaphosa benefiting from my activity. So it just needs to be a more critical situation. When we say South Africa, we mustn't say South Africa full stop. We must say South Africa question mark. What is this thing? Just to like if for instance I've taught third years and honors classes now, and my course is titled South Africa, Historical Injustice and Identity. And for a lot of my students, they don't know that South Africa began in 1910.
Mm.
They don't know about the South Africa Act, that there was no South Africa before 1910, right? So the narrative they have is that, first of all, the narrative they have starts with 1652, where Jan van Riebeeck and some, according to the education we got, and some people who were struggling with scurvy ended up in the Cape, right? And then from there, things were fair until colonization and conquest happened, and then the Great Trek. Whose story is this? When did this rupture begin or happen between injustice and justice? How does the Constitution fulfill the requirements of justice when you can end apartheid legally or formally? But at what point did colonization and conquest stop in order to bring apartheid? If apartheid itself was a colonial construction. So in 1994, what exactly happened? What magical thing happened in 1994 that now we don't have to think about the land?
Okay, I think, thank you, Kia, for that. I think the main thing now is, how do these people that are now there, how are they positioned to deal with this kind of historical baggage, to deal with all the history, the questions that Kia is asking about, which are legitimate? Is this a platform from which these questions can be addressed? Or are these people going to feel like the most urgent things now are the things that, service delivery, water, electricity, all of those kind of stuff? At what point, okay, let me put it like this. How is this parliament empowered to be able to deal both with the immediate and the long-term underlying issues that Kia is talking about?
Can I extend the question, please?
Yes,
okay.
Shortly.
How do you separate the urgency of land from the urgency of the services that you're talking about?
Yeah.
If, for instance, you are living in a 2 by 2 meter shack, what does access to water mean? What does access to sanitation mean when you do not have a place you can call your own? What exactly makes access to sanitation more urgent than having a place where you can feel like you're owning your agency, even if you were to call yourself a citizen?
I think those questions aren't mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
They are two sides of the same coin. So to say what's more urgent, land or services, I say yes, both are. I think with in today's age, we'd like to think of things in the binary. We don't think of things as, two things can be correct at the same time. So Kia makes very important points about access to land, because that's where development comes from. My thing is, ideologically, you could be left and you could be agitating, as she rightly calls it, for land, for radical transformation on the economy and so on. And that's all great and stuff. But the current leaders that we have right now on all the political parties, and I'm talking the top 5, top 3, top 5, minus the DA, because the DA is a center-right organization. Let's speak about the so-called African, or For Africans organization, African National Congress, MK, EFF, to some extent the IFP as well. There will be two men, and I agree with Uput Mondli. Just made it that although I've seen anecdotally that is, there are many people who would like those organizations, EFF, MK, ANC, to form a government. That they are saying Africans unite, African parties must unite. It's the opportunity now, Kodesa too, and all of those things. That's all good and well, but those personalities together, they will not work together. And a lot of the things you must see from the members of the ANC who want to lean towards the EFF coalition away from the DA, they're couching it in the sense of ideologically we're aligned, and the ANC, as Kia rightly characterized, was fighting for where it came out after land dispossession. It was formed from or subsequent to the Union of South Africa, Louis Botha, 1910, and all of those things. But it is not that now. And in the interim, those leaders right now, as we speak, some of those leaders want to go that route because they are scared that, I mean, there are arrests that are happening. You know, people have had their fingers in the cookie jar. And it's easier to protect yourself and control who gets arrested and not get arrested when you are in governance. Now you introduce a democratic alliance to the mix, which has always wanted certain people to be arrested. Failure or unfairly, that's a different conversation. Why aren't they going after Marcus Juster, who's allegedly dead, or why they're going after certain people? Those are fair questions to ask. But
Allegedly.
well, no one has seen his funeral. So I don't know anyone who's been to his funeral. So I can't confirm that he is exactly dead. So allegedly,
you are an investigative journalist, so I need to
hint. Anyway, so rightly or wrongly, that's where the DA is at the moment. And a lot of the people in the ANC who want to go with the EFF or maybe the MK or both are doing it out of self-preservation and not on ideological grounds. Because if ideological grounds were the main driver, the EFF post 2016 had 6% of the votes, about 25 members of parliament. The African National Congress at the time had 62.4 seats in the National Assembly. Combined, they could have done something to radically transform and, as Kia said, abolish certain aspects of what many people feel is an unprogressive constitution.
Section 25.
The EFF introduced a bill, I think it was in 2015 or 2016, to expropriate or to do stuff on the land, and it was rejected. Who was the president at the time? It was Jacob Zuma. So even then they couldn't work with each other when they had the numbers. Now the numbers are thin. You know, who says they're going to work with each other now? And it's because, you know, the sense of incumbency, what Kgalema Motlanthe characterized, I think it was at the 2002 Stellenbosch ANC conference, that those sense of incumbency, which lead to corruption, have totally clouded the mission of the ANC and sullied leaders who are coming in. So everyone who's coming into the ANC now, or they are looking at what's in it for me, instead of leadership. That's why I agree with Uput Mondli that these things will not work. These coalitions, yes, they might come together. A critical mass of people within the ANC could override what President Ramaphosa wants, because he wants to go the DA route. But they could override him and they could go with the EFF. But it will break down eventually because the personalities involved. It's the two bulls in the crown situation. It will fall apart and we will see a lot of instability there.
I'm going to give you now, Neb, but let me just overload it with these questions. I think there's a note here from a man or a man. Do you see the potential of civil unrest and protest during or as the coalition discussions are ongoing? If yes, what will influence its severity and so on? So are people expecting violence there? The question is, do you see the potential for civil unrest and protest as the coalition discussions are ongoing? So is there a likelihood of that? If yes, what will influence its severity, and what are the potential hotspots? And then Beulah Tumbadu, I hope I'm not misspelling your name. If they go ANC, DA, IFP, the kind of scenario we're pointing at, Mondli, wouldn't it be nation building to include PA? I think he's talking more from the colored population point of view. And Bafedile, one of the previous guests on this webinar, Bopape, says governments come and go, but the public service remains and must never be politicized. And you will see this country prosper. The problem is we no longer know who is a politician, who is a public servant. I think it's a point. Actually, she's written a book from her 28 years of experience as a public service of government. I'm glad to have your book, Bafedile. Now, let's go back to the questions that were asked before. The potential for violence and if they go and live out the PA, wouldn't that affect the nation building agenda?
Okay. All right. I want to start with the Constitution.
Yeah.
I think the Constitution is sacrosanct. I think it is the foundational document of this republic of ours, and we do not want to be in a jungle. The Constitution is a progressive Constitution. It protects a lot of rights of ordinary people, and it actually kind of like and a lot of its basis is in social justice transformation, and it actually it compels the government and whoever is in authority to do certain things to ensure that the social rights of South Africans are realized. Yeah. So this revisionism that kind of like there's a lot of revisionism that gained a lot of currency around roads must fall and fees must fall, that the Constitution was in the 1994 sellout and so on. That is not the case. I mean, like the interim Constitution was a very compromised Constitution. The 1996 Constitution was written by people who were elected, I mean, like in a democratically elected constitutional assembly, and it was adopted. And a lot of its basis actually comes from the ANC's constitutional principles, which were adopted before the ANC came back from exile even. It was a long process. And so this idea that this constitution somehow mirrors an alien society, a Western society, it's not. It actually is focused on the rights of the majority of South Africans, the majority of whom are Black people. And if we had a government in office, I mean, like, sorry, and a lot of those rights actually kind of like were reaffirmed in landmark judgments, such as Grootboom, such as the Nevarapin judgment. So the Constitution, when the cracks came down, the Constitution has always come down on the side of poor South Africans, but it's on the side of ordinary South Africans. So I really think that it's quite regressive to keep making the Constitution an enemy of the people when actually it actually protects the very basic person. I mean, like, and a lot of the criticism basically is based around the fact that property rights are protected. Those property rights are not necessarily the property rights of billionaires and big farmers. It's also the property right of the person who owns a home in Soweto and Katlehong and Umlazi and wherever. I mean, like that, you do have rights. If we do not have this, if this constitution was not there, I mean, like what we celebrate in South Africa in terms of the rights of LGBTQ people, I mean, like those would not be protected. Children would be subjected to beatings by their parents and school teachers, and so on and so on and so on. So I think let's respect let's respect the constitution. Where there's a need to tinker with stuff, I mean, like no constitution in the world has remained the same forever, but like it must be totally extremely, and it must only be to improve the constitution, not to take things back. So then you come in. So you're patient to come back.
You saying?
and then the other issue is, so what this country, this republic of ours, there are laws, there are policies that have been developed over the past 30 years, and there's a set of policies and things that government should be doing, should have done, which have not been implemented. Our problem here has been implementation. We could have gone very far in actually transforming the society had we done the things that kind of like the constitution and the laws obliges the state to do. And one of those is land redistribution, land restitution. There is a kind of like a whole thing, kind of like in the legal thing. There's an infrastructure, the land court, but legal. There's legislation around the restitution and redistribution of land. Budgets have been put forward, and the government has failed the people in redistributing land. Yeah. So we would be very far had the government actually done what it was supposed to do, but it has been caught up in like either lack of political will or just bureaucratic wrangling, bureaucratic inertia, and so on. And then, but I think also, I don't think we should romanticize the land question that much. You know, the South African struggle was not, I mean, like in Zimbabwe, it was very clear. It was about the land. The South African struggle, land was part of it. We were fighting for what we have. We wanted a democracy. We wanted to overthrow an oppressive regime and institute a non-racial democratic state. And that state is there, and that state is supposed to be serving the people. You go to any rural area in South Africa, and you see how kind of like how fertile land is lying fallow, because South Africans are heading to the cities. Even during that time when people were being hoodwinked and led by their noses, kind of like to go to those hearings around Section 25 saying, we want our land back. Those people have no interest whatsoever in farming. South Africans want to be in an industrial society. There are those people who do want to farm, and a lot of those people who want to farm are actually middle-class South Africans. And so I think this romanticization of the land question, I think that it's also just a thing that kind of like...
Is that view based on some
smoke
sort
and
of
mirrors.
research? That view, those views?
No, I mean, like, well, there is gut. I mean, like, you see it. I mean,
Okay.
like, go to the Eastern Cape, go to Limpopo, to Cape. Yeah, a lot of people do not actually kind of like, and in a lot of surveys, it's kind of like getting back the land is not kind of like, it doesn't show up as a priority for ordinary South Africans. And then the one that I think it answers one of the questions. I think, and that has to do with kind of like, we adopted a document in 2012 called the National Development Plan, NDP. Now, it was quite a consensus document adopted across society. There were some unions, kind of like some unions and some voices on the left which were not necessarily happy with the NDP. But there's something called the NDP, which set targets for 2030 about where South Africa should be. And one of those targets, and one of the important chapters of the NDP is the capable state. And the capable state is a state that basically, a depoliticized state that actually would be able to deliver the services and goods and yeah, again, as I said, a depoliticized state and a professionalized state. And I think that if we had, like the more ambitious elements of the NDP around literacy, around other areas, I think those we could have been kind of like, had we just done 20% of the NDP and actually also just concentrated on creating a capable state, but then Jacob Zuma was in power and he had no interest in that. So if I was part of the delegations of the coalition people, I would kind of like put on the table the NDP and saying, here's a minimum set of priorities in the NDP. Let us implement the NDP and work out how we implement the NDP.
What's your take?
Well, the NDP, I even forgot that there was something called NDP. You know, but it's funny because in 2012, during the ANC Mangaung National Conference, which re-elected Jacob Zuma as the party president, during his opening speech, his political report, he went off the cuff and he actually spoke in support of the NDP. So he spoke, there was a prepared statement by the NEC, and when he got to the part of the NDP, he actually went off the cuff and actually endorsed it and said we need to, but then subsequent to that conference, I don't know if he threw it in the dustbin or whatever, but nothing happened. And there was
it came under his government.
It came under his government. He was the one that started the NPC, the National Planning Commission, ironically, which had Cyril Ramaphosa as its deputy chairperson. I think Trevor Manuel was the chairperson of it as the Minister of Planning at the time. So he came up with that concept, and then once it was completed, he had no interest in it whatsoever. So whether whether there is still appetite to resuscitate, a lot has changed in the last 12 years. The world there's been COVID, there's been a lot of things, been wars, so whether it'll be dusted off, I'm sure there are still things that are one of which is a capable state to do all of those things. But whether there's still appetite for it, I don't know.
Well, I can tell you, sorry, just before you move, I can tell you that, Professor Somadoda Fikeni is now the chair of the Public Service Commission, and Zukiswa, we had a meeting with them. They are driving this issue of professionalizing and capable state. So it seems like it's still back on the agenda, and he's putting a lot of effort into it. Which
would be good. Just to answer a question, I think it was from Beulah, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Beulah Tubando.
Yeah, regarding nation building and including the PA. The DA won't allow the PA. They've already said that. In fact, on Sunday, the FW de Klerk Foundation of all people came out and asked that the Democratic Alliance in the Western Cape specifically extends an olive branch to the PA and vice versa, in order to, okay, this was a brutal election. It's obvious that there's a lot of discontent among the majority of citizens in the Western Cape, which are colored. So you guys are the main parties right now. Extend an olive branch to each other and see. Alan Winde came out straight after that and says, nope, we're not going to work with the Patriotic Alliance because they don't share the same values. So you could have the same policies, you could have sort of thing, but the values, he didn't elaborate what those values are, but he said he'll never work with the Patriotic Alliance because they don't serve any values. And Alan Winde is part of the negotiating team announced by John Steenhuisen for the Democratic Alliance. So if that is anything, if his statements on Sunday are anything to go by, in response to what the FW de Klerk Foundation had asked for the DA to work closer with the PA, if those statements by the Premier of the Western Cape are anything to go by, there's no chance that the DA. I understand what Beulah is asking, and to some extent I agree with it.
About the nation building
there
concept.
Needs to be a lot of I agree with it fully, but the actors involved, Beulah, aren't too interested in that.
All right.
Do you want to deal with the violence during?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. It's your turn. Yeah.
Okay, I'm moving away.
This is what this debate is about. It's for us to exchange views and disagree where it's necessary.
Okay, I think the issue of the Constitution it's an important issue, it's a central issue, and we mustn't divorce it from the conversation of voting and of citizenship and of rights. Okay. So there are a couple of issues that you raised, Monty, and I'm not quite sure where to start, but I'll start with the land issue. When we talk about political will and how it's lacking, most of the times because we hold the bill or the act or legislation that is in place to be justifiable. If we look at the Land Redistribution Act and the conditions that are within it, you can make a land claim, and this is part of the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act of 1995 to deal with reparations. The question of reparations when it came to land, the Land Commission was created. Land Commission was created, and you had the Land Redistribution Act coming to be after that. The conditions are, in order for a community to claim land back that they do not currently have, they have to prove that they were moved from that land, they or their forebears were moved from that land, and that dispossession was as a result of the 1913 Land Act, or it was from 1913. That's a huge red flag about which claims are considered legitimate and which are not. And it also shows this over-reliance on legislation as the lighthouse of what is right and what is just. So when we say that the ANC does not have, we would have been at a far place, no, we wouldn't. One, there's willing buyer, willing seller. You can't just take someone's land, or rather, you can't just take land from people who gained it unjustly, prior to 1913, and have generational land and generational ownership thereof, right? So the very policies that you're saying that the ANC, that we would be far if the ANC had followed them, they are unjustifiable because they take their point of departure from 1913, when the apartheid, not apartheid government, the colonial government, right?
Yeah.
Made that act moving black people away from their ancestral land, and at the same time there was more dispossession. Okay, it took him 300 years of dispossession before 1913. So what are we really saying about who the land is for, who's entitled to the land, what the rights of people who of heirs are, okay, and what generational benefits and generational disadvantage mean for what legislation should look like.
Yeah.
And then this thing of there's so much fertile land in the rural areas, that's just not true. The 1913 Land Act, just for context, 8% of the land was for indigenous people, not 50%. If we took this office and we gave 19 out of 20 people one room and one person gets the rest, obviously we can see that there's something wrong there. But now we want to perpetuate that dynamic by saying that the problem starts with when you. My metaphor has gone too far. Let me just say that.
All right.
Okay, so
we have to wrap up.
Just 1 second. We need to talk about territorial sovereignty. Okay, just to go back to the fertility of rural lands, 8% people are moved to the most unarable land, and even if we were to say black people don't want to farm, white people don't want to farm. You don't want to farm just because you're white, but you still have land, right? So why exactly can't black people have land and not want to farm? Why is farming the only legitimate use of your land? Then to Beulah, again, nation building, we've been here before. We can see that there's still animosity. Even after 1994, whose nation are you trying to build? Who is this nation you keep talking about? You don't just put random people together and call them a nation and then say that we are now reconciled because we're done with the TRC. So we need to, again, interrogate our assumptions in this conversation about elections and electorate, the nature of a citizen, the nature of the nation, the state.
Yeah. Okay. Are you done?
No.
No, you're not done. There's a lot to say, I'm sure.
I think we haven't responded to one question from Aman, whether there will be civil unrest during coalition negotiations.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't think there will be during the negotiations, but there could be post them if things don't go according to certain people's plans.
Okay, all right. I mean, given the fact that the majority of people on this platform are journalists, I need to ask this question about the role of the media leading up to from the sort of campaigning to the elections. I mean, the MK has been complaining, for example, about this being shut out of the SABC, for example, and things like that. How do you assess media performance in terms of both informing but also critical, whatever area you want to take?
Well, I mean, reporting, certain people need to understand that, reporting, so the elections have just happened now.
Yeah.
We know who are the parties that got or have a constituency and so on and so forth. That's the best empirical evidence to have on who to cover and when.
Yeah.
So people complaining that the ANC got too much coverage during the elections is I wouldn't say stupid, but it is misplaced because they are the governing party. A majority of citizens had voted for them. People complain that the DA is getting too much coverage. I think the coverage of the media is it's a tricky one because a lot of people might not want or might say, but there are smaller parties. Why aren't they covered as much? Oh, it's a question of resources in many occasions, because like most industries in this country, the media is shrinking, and so you need to then direct your resources to proportionally to where so you give respect to the ANC, the DA, the EFF, and then as the SAPC was very good at that, in that they covered a lot of the smaller parties as well. But what a lot of people want is, more coverage for them. So they want a 30-minute segment instead of the 30 seconds that they're getting.
But also, if I can just let you know, I'll give you now. The voices that you allow, you give space on your publications.
Yeah, we can certainly do better with that.
Yeah,
I'm one who's very critical of coverage in the media. In fact, I was very critical on how we covered Rise Mzansi in the beginning. I remember reading a Daily Maverick article that began with Songezo Zibi is a breath of fresh air, and the only reason that they used to say Songezo Zibi is a breath of fresh air is that he arrived early for a meeting and he had no bodyguards. I mean, now what? He came alone with no bodyguards and he was early. I mean, if you're putting if you're putting that, and then you look at who Songezo Zibi is, he's a former editor, of so now it's like, we are propping up one of our own, giving him sweetheart coverage because he's one of our own. And those criticisms are valid. And I'm also one person who regularly criticizes the media publicly, because I understand that as a field reporter, I go to the field a lot, and when you go there, you encounter a lot of animosity from people because of perceived biases, whether right or wrong. That one was pretty correct. You can't do, and there were a lot of, I'm picking on the Daily Maverick here, but there were across Mail and Guardian, even where I'm from, News 24, where I was at the time, did a lot of swooning coverage of Rise Mzansi. And my question was, but what constituted that? What informed that? Because they hadn't contested elections, they had no representative in any council or legislature. Why are they getting an inordinate amount of coverage vis-a-vis, say, the AIC, which had a mayor at the time in Ekurhuleni, but is not covered by anyone. But it has a constituency. It's been tested and is in representative council. So I understand those criticisms, and they are valid to some extent.
Mohan, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'd like to have the last word.
So, okay, after you.
I actually used to be a journalist myself.
Oh, really? Okay.
For the city press. So I'm privy to what happens in the newsroom. And I think when I was a journalist, I think it was 2010 or 2009 or thereafter, there was a front page of the MNG where the editorial was, "We don't normally do this."
Yeah.
It was before an election, but we'll tell you who not to vote for.
Yeah, they said vote DA.
So I think what the media needs in South Africa is to disabuse itself, mainstream media, disabuse itself of the notion that it's objective and that it's just for the people. There are too many interests to think about when writing a story. Even the general culture in a newsroom, you have people with different ideologies, but there's one that's going to, the editor is going to determine what kind of story goes in and how it's written. So I think, first of all, that I'm not a fan of the US, but at least that media is clear. Like, we're writing this story because we like Trump. And for instance, we know when he was convicted of the 34 felonies, Fox News tried its best to just twist and turn and, look at this animal. How do we make it look beautiful? South African media does the same thing, but it's just not transparent about who it's supporting and in whose interest is writing. And even things like funding, you have to think about, you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. So you can't just write any story about any element in society that benefits you for them to look good. So I think just South African media needs to stop feeling noble and just be transparent about who which political or which politics
Yeah.
you are actually advancing in your stories, you know.
Okay, we have gone further than the time, but I need to give you the last word on this issue, and then we're going to just do a quick roundup of concluding.
No. So I do want to deal with that. I mean, just firstly to deal with Gio's point is that actually what we say is, I mean, like I don't believe we should take that model kind of like the Guardian, you know, it's Labour. The Telegraph, you know that it's Tory, and in the US, NYT is Democrat, what. I think South African media reports, and it's very rare. And like the fact that we can remember that kind of like, I remember that editorial, and I was perturbed by it. Yeah, and I remember the article that, I mean, like the editorial, the front page editorial. I remember kind of like also feeling discomforted by that.
Yeah,
that thing that you spoke about, because I mean, like, yes, I'm of the view that kind of like that we are in this society, and I know it might sound, you call it noble, but I think it may be noble, but I think it's good that we see ourselves as being on the side of the people, and that we actually speak, that we reflect what they want to see, that we try to protect them. We don't do a great job always, and that we always, and here it's something that that I will kind of like, that I will never be reticent about, that we will always promote and protect the Constitution of the Republic at all times. If that constitutes a kind of politics, then that's fine. But I think the Constitution should be protected at all times. And I, as a journalist, or even when I'm no longer a journalist in future, it's something that I will always hold dear and protect everything. Insofar as these elections were concerned, I actually think that there are fair criticisms of how we covered it, but I think a lot of us went out of our way to actually give the smaller parties more than their fair share. The AZAPOs, the PACs, and so on, people who would not normally get coverage. The PA got quite a lot of coverage in the media, and MK was very difficult to cover because there's one person who's a spokesperson, there's a president, and there's a spokesperson, and very few of the people around, even the other officials, the other leaders,
wanted to talk.
They just
they were not available.
No, it's just impenetrable. It's a very tightly controlled messaging. So, and then, but where I think that we did fall short, and I will blame resources, because our newsrooms are a lot smaller than they used to be. That all of us were not on the ground enough during the elections. Like in previous elections, and I've been at this for the longest time, we would be able to send out teams to everywhere, to the furthest corner of this country. But here, where we have to make it, in this day and age, you have to make a choice between Katlehong and Soweto.
You can't send it to both.
No. I mean, you can't even be sending to Nelspruit or kind of like or Weber district. I'm saying that kind of like we have become a lot smaller, and the choices that we have to make are a lot tighter. I'm being facetious. We were able to send people to further areas, but
get the point.
Not enough. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, colleagues, I think we've gone further than I had thought. I told you that it's just going to be an hour and 30 minutes, but it's been 2 hours of exciting conversation. And I really want to appreciate our viewers who stayed with us up until this point. And I'd like to thank you, especially for submitting your questions, making sure that you get us to talk to you and to understand what your views are. I really appreciate that. This webinar is going to be on the Mail and Guardian website, and you can also visit Good Governance Africa website, where we're going to have the copy of this there. Because we want as many people to have access to it. Feel free to reach out to us and contact us so that we can have a better governed country going forward in the interests of the people. Because what's the point of governance if it does not improve the lives of people? What's the point of elections when they are not yielding to material changes of people's lives? There's a lot to talk about, and I'm sure we're going to have these conversations again in the future. I really want to say thank you to my team here of great panelists who have taken on each other and really dealt with some of the deeper issues, underlying issues, as well as issues that appear to be of pain and of interest to all of you. And I think we've covered quite a large spectrum of issues, but we're waiting on bated breath for the outcome of this election, especially as it presents itself in Parliament. And so we, as GGA, are going to keep you informed. And I'd like again to say thank you so much, Kaya, for coming. Thanks, Monthly. Thanks, Kia. And I don't know if you want to say just for seconds to our people watching.
The country is safe.
All right.
Yeah, I think we are going to be in for a very sometimes chaotic but very interesting 5 years. But I think that word about cliche. That cliched word again. That kind of like that. This is a maturing of our democracy.
Yeah.
Let's appreciate the moment. It's going to be difficult, but let's appreciate where we are at.
Okay.
I think two things.
Yeah.
One, this constitution is an unjust imposition on the native people of the land.
Mm-hmm.
Two, my name is Kiu.
Kiu.
Yes.
Kiu, yes. Yeah. Sorry about that. But I think the viewers at home are going to forgive us for that. Anyway, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening until the next webinar. All the very best to all of you. Thank you. And thanks to you too. Yeah.
Thank you.